Hello, I'm Kimberly Bishop, Associate State Director at AARP Michigan. Thank you for joining us this morning. Our topic is COVID 19 or coronavirus, but this is a bit different than our normal teletown halls with elected officials. Today, we'll hear a firsthand account from someone who contracted COVID 19 after caring for a loved one who also tested positive. We'll hear about her experiences leading up to her diagnosis, the challenges she faced during her illness, and how she's used this experience to help others. I'm pleased to announce that joining us today is my colleague and friend, Tara Shaver, who lives in Nashville, Tennessee. Tara is an advisor in the Office of Volunteer Engagement. She works with staff and volunteers across the country as we carry out our mission, which is to empower people to choose how they live as they age. Welcome, Tara, and thanks for joining us today.
Hey, good morning, Kim. Thanks so much for having me.
I have a few questions that I'd like to ask, but we'll also be taking questions from the audience if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Great. So if you have a question at any time, please type it in the comments section so that I can ask Tara. So, Tara, we'll get started. I know that you received your diagnosis in early March. Can you share a bit about what led up to your diagnosis?
Yeah, so around my birthday on March 4th, my boyfriend he woke up feeling sick and he was thinking that it was um, uh, he was like, I'm sick. I should probably stay away from things. And so he went to the doctor and asked, told them all his symptoms, which at the time was just really feeling run down. He was feeling feverish and just really felt like something was off. And he went into an urgent care clinic that's very close to our house, and they did a flu test, which was negative. They did, a physical with him, and they just kind of sent him home with I think they maybe even gave him maybe some cough medicine or something. It was something very random the first visit. And about 3 days later, he wasn't better. He was still feverish. He was still feeling really run down and just like something was amiss. He really couldn't get up off the couch, and was having a really restless night's sleep. And so he went back into urgent care. This time they gave him a steroid shot, and I think maybe sent him home with a prescription. And again, flu test came back negative. And so, like you said, Kim, this was in early March when I don't even think anybody was mentioning the coronavirus test at this time. And so, again, about 3 days later, he still wasn't better. And this is when his doctor urged him to go in to one of the larger clinics and to have a full workup. And so at that time, they not only did some blood testing, they did a full physical with an X-ray and other things, but they said, because we don't know what else to do, let's give you a COVID test. And then they just sent him home. And so the next morning, so again, this was about a week after the onset of his symptoms. About the next morning, our phones were blowing up at 7 a.m. And they said your coronavirus test was positive. And at that time, we were like, "What? What's going on?" It was such a strange thing to hear because it wasn't really all over the news here. It was just one of those things that I think everyone was paying attention to in world news. And so it was quite a surprise to us that I think actually the very next phone call we had was from the public health department, and our new best friend Josh, our epidemiologist, who is the person responsible for doing some of the contact tracing. And so this was a whole new world for us, and especially interesting that Rick was only the second person in our county to receive this diagnosis, and later we learned the eighth person in Tennessee, so the eighth person in the whole state. So we were at the very, very beginning of the curve, and it still is a little bit surreal.
So, when did you test positive and how did you find out about your diagnosis?
Well, of course, they're like, and by the way, we need you to go get tested as soon as you can. And so, of course, I was going to do that. But also, we thought, uh oh. that means my expectations were set at I'm going to be positive, so that was also not too much of a shocker. But they sent me that same day, again, the day we got the phone call, over for the swab test. And they called me. Actually, I think I received my results in my telehealth app before I got them by phone call. And so knew that, the test was positive. And then we followed the same sequence of events that we had for Rick, for myself. So retracing our steps for the last, 2 weeks, but in particular, they really focused on the last week. So basically, since Rick knew something was off, and the onset of symptoms is when they traced our activity back to.
So I'll have to confess, I know a little bit about the contact tracing because Tara and I actually had dinner 3 days before she tested positive. So once she notified me that she tested positive, I immediately called my doctor, who called our local health department, and I was instructed to self quarantine and monitor myself for symptoms until 14 days post the time that Tara and I had dinner. So fortunately, I never exhibited any symptoms that warranted my being tested. But that again was at the very beginning of the curve, where doctors just weren't really sure what to do. So Tara, what happened next?
So you're right, Kim. You were one of the first on the list because Rick was sick. I was obviously not out and about very much anyway. And as you know, I had a day. 2 or 3 days before we had dinner, I was like, "Oh, I feel just kind of cruddy," and I just didn't really leave the couch the whole day. But I wasn't. I might have had a 1 or 2 degree above normal fever, but I was not running a high fever, and I wasn't really exhibiting any serious symptoms. I had a very minor cough, and so had no reason to believe that by Monday I wasn't okay to go, have dinner with a friend. And so I'd not had very much activity or outside the home or interaction with folks, and especially not the kinds of activity that they were tracing, which was close contact for a longer period of time. At the time, they were asking, "Have you been within 6 feet of another person and for longer than 15 minutes?" And so, of course, dinner would qualify. And so, there were people, and this was just very interesting to me, that at that time, they weren't concerned about folks that we had just encountered outside, even for a few minute chat, because all of the conditions of being outside really do change a lot of the concerns that the professionals have about exposure and about contamination. And so, the mystery for us was really kind of where did this come from? And as we traced it back, we couldn't remember anyone we'd encountered who was sick. And so this is still a mystery of where we picked up the virus. And that's what I think we have really driven home. And you know that as well. And you've done a great job of sharing that with your friends and family and networks, is that no matter how, I wasn't out and about very much, and Rick was only going to work and school. And so we weren't doing any kind of behaviors that might seem risky to some. We weren't going to parties every night, or we weren't just doing a lot of fun activities. We were just taking care of business. And Rick does work in hospitality, so for him, we said, "You got sick first. You brought it in." That had to be what was going on. But even he couldn't think back to a specific incident that he'd had that really sent the light bulb off. And so after we received the diagnosis, they asked us, like they ask you, just to stay in our home and self quarantine for 14 days. And that was from the onset of our symptoms. So that was also a bit of a surprise to me. I thought it might be 14 days after, you find out and they start tracing you. But because they've asked for all of your interactions in the past, and start to really try to put that piece, the puzzle together for you, then they only want you to make sure that you're staying isolated for 14 days. But I can tell you that the way that it went for both of us, we didn't want to go anywhere. So even though I'd only had that one day where I ran a little mild fever and just felt totally worthless, I actually continued to experience some progression of symptoms. And about a week in is when the shortness of breath started for me. And that was kind of odd because again, I had a much milder experience than Rick had. The cough was something that was just more of a bother. It wasn't the kind of cough that I think most of us think about when we get a cough when we're sick with an illness, which would keep you up all night, for example. We didn't have that experience. It was something that just came on somewhat randomly. And especially as it progressed, it was more with activity or putting any kind of pressure on in our lung area. For example, I said one of my best examples of like a normal thing you would do that would cause me to really have a lot of discomfort was that I've been over to pick up some towels off of the floor to put them in the hamper. And it not only was uncomfortable, but then it started me into a coughing fit. So I just stopped bending over to pick up towels for as long as we could. And so the symptoms for us really did last for about 12 to 14 days. And so I've talked a little bit about, how my symptoms were not only by me considered to be mild, but by the professionals. And really, because we were able to take care of ourselves at home, they still considered both of our symptoms mild. But as a contrast to that, Rick he had night sweats and high fevers for about 12 nights. So he was soaking the bed with sweat. And we were having to try to deal with that kind of stuff in the middle of the night. So thanks for mentioning early on that this is, part of the caregiving and part of having someone in your household, is that we're not talking just exposure from being kind of around them, because they could get, really sick with a fever. And you think about an adult person having all these feverish symptoms that sometimes you have to change the bed, or you have to, come in with other things to clean up and kind of get things back to normal. We were doing that every night. And so before we knew what we were dealing with, I'm dealing with all this because that's what you do as a caregiver, as a loved one who's helping take care of someone who doesn't feel well. And so that exposure was even higher than we even expected just from coexisting in the house with someone. It was quite remarkable that by the 14th day, let's say, from the first time that Rick said, I don't feel too good, he woke up and was like, bing, I'm back to normal. I feel great. And, was running around picking up empty Gatorade bottles and towels off the floor and, all of that kind of stuff. And for me, I continued to have just lethargy. I was sleeping 12 or 14 hours a night, and I would still have to take a nap during the daytime. A lot of brain fog, just kind of not, certainly not productive, but at times not even able to really kind of get myself going to get anything done, except the bare basics. And so that's what was so weird about this. And lots of folks have asked us questions about the um, loss of taste and smell. We didn't notice this. We did not describe it like that. We just said we don't have an appetite. And so Rick knew that he hadn't eaten several days in, again, before he even knew what was going on. He had ordered some Chinese takeout, his favorite thing to do when he doesn't know what he wants to eat. And he opened the package and he just closed the package. And it sat in the refrigerator for a week. He said, I can't take a bite. And we both had that similar experience. He said everything was tasting metallic to him, and so we thought it was some of the medication. Medications will do that, that they had given him early on. But even after he stopped taking the medication, that persisted for him. So he was saying even things like Gatorade or just anything that he was trying to drink also had a weird taste to it. I didn't notice that as much as just zero desire to eat, and not even soup, not even broth. It was like all I wanted was to drink. I wanted, and not like, party drinking. I just wanted to, unlike some of the other quarantine stories we've heard. No, all I wanted to do was like drink as much water as I possibly could. And we were just packing in the hydration drinks. So some friends had sent us some liquid hydration, some of the drinks that that bicyclists and runners and folks use. And we went through those packets, and we were going through bottles of Gatorade, just as quick as we were getting them. And so I've done a lot of things that make me very thirsty. I've hiked to Machu Picchu, and I was very thirsty on that trek. I've never been as thirsty as I was during this time, and it was just such a weird thing to experience, that after several days, not having any desire to have even a snack was just bizarre. So that was a real telltale sign, and we now know that that is something, to be aware of, that comes along with it. So that was pretty crazy. In terms of us being at home during that time, folks were like, "What did you do? Did you get bored?" No, we were so sick. Rick was certainly so sick, but I was so tired and, just trying to take care of our basic needs. We didn't get bored. I don't think we turned on the TV until very close to the end of that 14 days. And for us, it was really probably a 21-day period when we were staying home, because we just didn't feel like, paying attention to anything. And so lots of resting and lots of just kind of getting up the energy that we could to just do the basic chores that we needed to do to get by. So that was something that was also just a bit bizarre, because again, it was early in the process, so we had not already been home for several months before having to stay absolutely inside. So things were a bit different for us early on, but it's surprising how much things have really stayed the same. And I think that is where what we're doing here is important, because I hope people will have questions for us. But if not, we've got a whole list of frequently asked questions. Yeah, where people, have heard rumors that have been circulating, and because those rumors become so prevalent, they think that they are, it's the new thing, right? So just last week, I heard someone say the CDC said don't take anti-inflammatories. Why are you talking about that you took Tylenol? And actually, it's because the CDC has still not changed what they said early on, which was listen to your doctor, because there's been no proof that anti-inflammatories have any negative, or negative reaction to someone who is experiencing the virus.
Were either of you hospitalized during this time?
So Rick was, and again, we were, I think because we're both relatively young and healthy, we were. He's a little bit more dramatic about getting sick, and so I'm the tough one who says, "You're fine. You're not going to die. You're okay." But after the shortness of breath set in, one of the things that happened was, for me, it was a bother. I was paying attention to it. I was noticing the things I could or couldn't do and kind of just making note. For him, he said, "I can't breathe. I'm having a hard time getting a full breath." And then within 12 hours or so, he said, almost every breath, I really am not able to breathe in a full breath. And then that started to make him a little nervous. And so he said he called his doctor's office and explained what was going on. And they said, "We'll call you right back." And we're like, "Okay, what's going on?" When they called back, they said, "Here's this cell phone number for the attending physician in the ER. Um, get your stuff together and go to the emergency department in the ambulance bay and call them when you're 10 minutes out. They'll meet you out there." And so they were concerned, specifically because he was younger and healthy, that he had started experiencing this, what seemed almost suddenly. And so they did keep him overnight. He was there for 24 hours. And at that time, they were really monitoring him for any progression that would make it necessary for them to take some action so that he didn't get into a dangerous situation. Lucky for him, nothing got worse, and they were able to send him home after 24 hours. And it was only about 3 days after that that he woke up. "Hey, I feel great today." So
Wow.
it was a really, really mysterious, and unique experience for those few weeks. We're like, what a fascinating disease process! Just really, really interesting.
Have either of you taken the antibody test?
So funny, we haven't. And the reason is that we have been participating in some studies almost one of the nicest things that happened from the hospitalization is that Rick was sent home with a flyer about a vaccine study that Vanderbilt University was doing here in Nashville. And so we reached out to them as soon as we got the all clear that our quarantine was up to participate. So our antibodies have been under the microscope since then. So we knew, that our antibodies were there, and we haven't felt a need to take an antibody test for any other reason. We've also been doing plasma donation, and we can talk more about that if you like. But and for a couple of different causes. So we haven't taken the test just to see because we know they're there. I think it probably would be interesting to take the test just to see, but we haven't made the time to do that just yet.
Because I have heard of people who tested positive, then negative, and positive again. So that's kind of an interesting scenario as well. So Tara,
Yeah.
because I know you, I know you have friends across the country, across the globe, and you really use social media as a way to keep people updated on how you were doing so that we didn't have to call you or text you 99 times. In a lot of ways, you became like the face of COVID. Can you share some of the things that you did at that time just to keep people informed and how your story spread?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up because it still is surreal to me. I'm having chills as you were talking about it because the way that it happened was so funny to me in that I am not one who typically has anything very much public. If it's something I'm sharing for AARP, I'll make that public on my profile, things of that nature. But as you can imagine, once we got that diagnosis, actually the diagnosis for Rick, I texted a few friends, of course, to let folks know, hey, think of him, but also for people we had been around, what was happening. And pretty quickly, just between some of our immediate friends and family members and word spreading that way, you're right, my phone was blowing up and I really couldn't keep up with the details and the questions that folks were asking. And I think that's still the same now because there's a lot of stuff being pushed at us every day. And so for my friends and my family, especially, to say to me, this is really important and you're answering our questions. I I think I had a list going and I just said, I'm going to do a video. And Rick's like, what? I said, I'm going to just do a video. I'm going to put it on Facebook, but I'm going to keep it private. But I just want to address everybody's questions. And so those folks who were messaging me, I said, I'm about to do a video. Stay tuned to Facebook and I'm going to take all the questions. So I did a Facebook Live and I just started out with that he'd received the diagnosis and what they were asking us to do. And in the moment, took those questions from friends and family and I said, hey, if you miss this, just keep giving the questions here and I'll do another video to be able to address those and to answer more questions. Well, within a matter of hours, I had a very special request from a dear friend of mine who is quite a bit younger. And she said, can you make this public? And I was like, oh, we all know how off the rails things can get, even just with people sharing their own experiences. And so I said, let me think about it. And I paced the floor for a little bit. And then I said, okay, I'll do it. But if things start to go off track and away from the intent of these videos, then I'm not, I'm going to just shut them down. And so I made that really clear also when on the next event that I went live. And I cannot believe how many people were not only thankful, but respectful. We only had a couple of folks to make kind of snarky comments. And most of those weren't even on my videos. They were actually when someone had shared or someone, it was just kind of third hand information. And so it was just quite amazing that I started to do a daily video update and shared, I think maybe once or twice if there was something unusual that had come up, like Rick going to the hospital. I kind of gave an update at that moment and just continued to take questions from people live while we were doing it, just like we're doing here, as well as in the comment section. And that's what I would use to create the Q&A for the next day. as well as anything that had come up to us from our daily contact with the health department. So, our epidemiologist reached out every single day to do a check in about our symptoms, and just to get, answer any questions that we had. And so that was a real gift to us to be able to chat with him before doing those updates, because there were oftentimes that he had new information before it had even hit the public space. And some of those things were like, after you received a diagnosis, that the quarantine time later was shortened, and so he was able to tell that to us at the end of our 14 days. So it didn't benefit us much, but we started to realize how quickly things were changing, and he was always really candid with us. But anyway, we did a daily video diary answering those questions, talking about any new information that had come up, and doing lots of shout outs for people sending us things from all over, just to try to help make that time at home a little bit easier. And by the end of at the end of our time doing those daily updates, our videos organically had reached something like 100,000 views, and I had received direct messages from people from all over the world, who were thanking me for helping put their minds at ease, helping to calm their children's fears by seeing a real person talk about their experiences, and also just really, my mom is 3 hours away from me, and Rick's mom is 12 hours away from us by car, and they were so relieved to be able to, you know, see and hear from us in a way that was more authentic, and maybe even just more valuable, because we were covering these questions that other people had, and knowing that they probably had them too, but just didn't want to bother us by asking. Your closest loved ones are often the ones who don't want to make you feel, don't want to make you do extra effort. That's Willie the dog. Kim knows Willie. Willie is having quite a meltdown this morning.
We have all kinds of coworkers that we didn't have before, so I think everyone understands.
Exactly, and he is, the quarantine's getting to him too. So if anybody says, "Oh, we're doing fine," I'm sure there are some folks who are absolutely loving it, but Willie is also being bothered by having been home for now, what, 4 or 5 months of not having kind of the usual activity. And I see we have some questions, so I'll stop chattering on.
No, this is great. The question is, how long did it take you to recover totally? And I'm assuming from start to finish. And, as I recall, this was right on the heels of a bit of a natural disaster in Nashville.
It was, and that you have family here outside the area, which was why you were here. And just earlier in the week, we had been talking about whether or not your family was okay during all the storms. We had a tornado hit just 2 days before Rick started feeling ill, and that was around March 2nd. And so it was crazy because it's like boom, 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 right in a row. I had also just come off just a couple weeks prior, quite a heavy travel season at the very first part of the year. And so to be uh, to be kind of dealing with the natural disaster that had also happened very close to my doorsteps. My neighborhood was hit hard, but luckily we didn't have any damage here. And then to be kind of dealing with something that was just so new, it was just crazy. There's no other word for it. It was just so crazy. 2020 has been quite the interesting year for us all. But I would say, for myself, about 21 days before I was starting to feel like, okay, I don't have to have a nap today, and I can sleep 9 hours and not be just mush. And that's the part that Rick's like, "You weren't even that sick." And I said, you don't see fatigue. You don't see some of these things that just felt like my body was super heavy. Now, I attribute some of that to having to push through because he was so sick and having to care for him. So I can't say for certain how much of that was the virus. But I will say, for Rick, as soon as he was sick, and again, thinking that, well, it might be the flu, but now the flu test is negative, and then it's like 3 days in. Normally, most of us are feeling better by 3 to 5 days. To
Mhm.
know that this virus ran its course over about 14 days for him, it really is mind blowing, because it wasn't just, oh, he's got a little sniffle towards the end. He was having those night sweats for like 12 nights, and running a fever that we couldn't get to, couldn't get to come down and stay down, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It wasn't so high it was scary, but again, an adult running anybody running a fever for more than just a couple of days is alarming. And so, that 2 weeks or 14 days, the old saying really did apply here.
So I'm just curious, what are your thoughts or your recommendations for people who don't want to wear masks?
Stay at home and don't have anyone come over because honestly, and again, this is one of those things, Kim, because we share the opinion on this, and this is what's so beautiful. I can't think of a better person to have had to have exposed to coronavirus when I didn't know I was a carrier, to have dinner, with you, because immediately when I said you're hey, Rick's been diagnosed and they're sending me for a test, and you're like, okay, I'm calling my doctor. And immediately you were just like, I'm on it. So by the time I talked to our epidemiologist and he says, who have you been in contact with? And anybody in this time, I was like, and this friend, she's already taken care of business. So you call her last because she's got it under control. But that the importance, there was a lot of, I think, there was a lot circulating about how just one person wearing a mask isn't all that helpful from if you're worried about contracting the virus, right? It's
Mhm.
not about that. If you haven't seen the good illustrations that are out there about why it makes sense when everybody's wearing a mask, please take a look, because um, it is really about, if everyone's wearing them. First of all, from those of us who are a little more vain, if everybody's wearing them, you don't feel like a dum dum. So you don't feel like, that you should take your mask off because no one else is wearing it. If everybody's wearing them, it just becomes normal. It's not that inconvenient, and literally surgeons wear them for 12 hours a day at times. So, the folk, I have all the sinus and allergy issues, and I live in the humid South. And is it uncomfortable when I wear one to the farmer's market on Friday nights? Yes, but I still wear it, and it just helps me, pick up the pace and get my shopping done a little bit quicker, so that I can get in the car and take it off. But it really is important that folks wear masks, and I think it sets a good example. We've been wearing masks, even though, yes, we don't know how long our antibodies are in our system, but we have every reason to believe that we are um, protected by our antibodies, at least for the season, which I'm calling the fall, because that would be the next onset of flu season,
Mhm.
which is kind of what we saw happen with the coronavirus as well. But if we wear masks, we started wearing them as soon as we were able to go out in public. And so now I've just made it like, let's find stylish masks, or I'm dying for travel. So I just bought one that's a map mask. So I'm waiting on it to come in.
All right. Well, thank you, Tara, for joining us today and sharing your experience. I wish you and Rick continued good health, but I'm wondering if you have a final thought to share with our viewers.
Yeah, just want to share one more kind of odd thing that happened to us, which was, we were talking about recovery most recently, and while we were feeling better, there have been some kind of after effects of the virus that I think are worth mentioning, because there may be folks who there are those who say they're not sure if they had it because maybe they had something that was really mild. I had a mild case, and I still consider it mild, even despite how my symptoms progressed. About 6 weeks after we were feeling better, we both started to experience some crazy hair loss. I would equate it to moms who have lost their hair after pregnancy. When they start to do that major shed, it was just handfuls of hair coming out. And that lasted for about 3 weeks for me. It lasted probably the same amount of time for Rick, but he has less hair, so it wasn't as noticeable for him as it was continuing to shed. But I was losing about 3 times the amount of hair that I normally lose. And it was alarming. The first time I was like, oh, that's weird. And then, when it continued, I'm like, oh gosh, should I get worried? What am I, what's going on? And I was reminded by a hairstylist friend of mine that, after any kind of trauma, surgery is usually the things that folks think about, but really after any kind of trauma to your body or illness, it's normal to lose hair like that. So, if you start experiencing hair loss that is a little bit unusual, and it continues. Certainly talk to your doctor, but just know that it may be the experience from the stress or from even having that sickness. So I think that's worth mentioning. And the only other thing I would say is that there's just so much circulating. And we've talked a lot about social media, and I was able to use social media for the good, and we're still doing it here. And I'm so happy we're able to continue talking about it because we know it was so helpful. But use that snooze button. If people are stressing you out by the stuff they're sharing on Facebook, snooze them for 30 days so that it's not stressing you out, and go straight to the source. The National Institutes of Health, the CDC, even your own public health department usually have a frequently asked questions section. And so that's where I go to do my resource checking. If someone, shares something and they're sharing it as fact, and I'm like, that I don't remember seeing that come out from anywhere. I go dig it up and I try in the best way that I can to share that back to them without starting conflict or anything like that, but just to share it back with the link that goes directly to the source. And I think that's one of the best things that we can do as users of social media during this time, because social media is a tool that has been just remarkable during this time that folks have been staying safer at home, in order to keep friends and family connected, and for people to use the tools to try to be in the room with people when they can't be in the room with people. And so, there's no reason to associate just negative things with that. I think it really can be a tool used for good. And I was glad to be able to see that firsthand. So again, thanks for giving me another platform to talk about this. And if folks want to see some more of those diaries, we can certainly share in the comment section the link to the YouTube. So I've put those up on YouTube because Facebook is impossible to navigate. Once you get 11 or 12 videos on a timeline, it's really hard to find them again. So we can certainly share that in the comment section below.
All right. Well, Tara, thank you so much for being here with us today. If I was going to have the COVID cooties, there was not a better person to have shared them with than you. I'm glad I didn't get them. But thank you for being here. And thank you to those who are viewing. If you'd like to see more events on fraud, brain health, healthy living, and more, please be sure to like the AARP Michigan Facebook page and visit our website at aarp.org/mi. Thank you and have a great day.